Hello everyone. Today we'll be discussing the next topic in our chapter. The last class we have discussed the topics like insectivorous plants. So moving on to the next topic, today we'll be discussing saprotrophs. Now, what is saprotroph? So let us see. We know there are two modes of nutrition that we have discussed in the earlier classes, that is the autotrophic and the heterotrophic mode of nutrition. Now we know plants are generally autotrophic in nature, but some plants are also heterotrophic in nature, that is dependent on other plants and animals. But there are also some plants, or we may say organisms also, which are dependent on plants and animals, but which are not living, they are dead. So the first point says some of the plants don't depend on other living plants or animals for their nutrition. So carefully note down, the word is written living. So they don't depend on the living things, they depend on the non-living things. No, it is not non-living, we say it is the dead. They get their nutrition from the dead and the decaying matter. Some plants are there which get their nutrition from the dead and the decaying matter. Now plants that get their nutrition from the dead and the decaying matter are called saprotrophs. So here we get our definition. What are saprotrophs? Saprotrophs are such plants which get their nutrition from the dead and the decaying matter. It can be a dead plant or a dead animal. One example I am given, that is mushroom. You all know what is a mushroom. Some of them are poisonous, some of them are edible. So mushroom is an example of a plant that get their nutrition from the dead and the decaying matter. So we can say mushroom is a saprotroph. So this is a mushroom. Clear? Now moving on to the next topic, saprotrophic nutrition. Now what is saprotrophic nutrition? We have learned what is saprotrophs. Now let us move to what is saprotrophic nutrition. Organisms that get their nutrition from the dead and the decaying matter are called saprophytes. Now here a confusion may arise in your mind that the earlier slide I have shown, I have told about saprotrophs. Now what is saprophyte? So there is definitely a confusion that might arise in your mind. So these are not different things, but you can say these are similar things. Why in the similar? Because whenever we discuss the saprotrophic nutrition or saprotrophs, the term saprotrophs are used only in terms of plants. But there are also some organisms which follow this saprotrophic nutrition or which get their nutrients from the dead and the decaying matter. So what we call them as a whole? We call them as a whole saprophytes. Now the mode of nutrition in which these organisms take in nutrients in the solution form from the dead and the decaying matter is called saprotrophic nutrition. These organisms, there are some organisms which get their nutrients from the dead and the decaying matter. And this mode of nutrition is called saprotrophic nutrition. Now how do they get their nutrition from the dead and the decaying matter? These organisms secrete digestive juices on the dead and decaying matter and convert them into a solution. Then they absorb the nutrients from it. We all know the dead plants or animals, they get decayed after some time. How do they get decayed? Due to these organisms. These organisms secrete some digestive juices which dissolves this dead and the decaying matter into a soluble form. They cannot directly eat up or take nutrition directly from the dead and the decaying matter. It may be plants or animals. So what they do is that they make it in a soluble form, then they absorb those nutrients in the soluble form. For example, fungi or fungus, whichever you say, is an organism, because a microorganism also, is an organism which follows this saprotrophic mode of nutrition. Now you might be thinking, is mushroom also a saprophyte? Yes, mushroom is also a saprophyte, but since it is a plant, we use the term saprotrophs. But it also follows the same saprotrophic mode of nutrition. You can see fungus on the bread. If you keep the bread moist for some time or some days in a hot and humid weather condition, then you will see this. You can try this at home. Most of you even know this. This is fungus on bread. So fungus is a saprotrophic organism, and it follows this saprotrophic mode of nutrition. So fungus can be on any thing, mostly which are in the damp and the hot and the humid places. Their fungus growth is more. Particularly during the rainy season, you may see fungus which may be of any color, like white in color, brownish in color. You can see them everywhere, wherever the places are damp or there is no sunlight and the favorable hot and humid weather conditions are there. Now moving on, next is symbiotic relationship. Now what is symbiotic relationship? Let us see. When two different kinds of organisms live together and share shelter and nutrients, such a relationship is called symbiotic relationship. It is just like bringing a guest to our home and living together, or calling a friend of yours and sharing the same home, sharing the same food. This is a symbiotic relationship. So such phenomenon also occurs in the nature, where two different kinds of organisms live together in the same environment and help each other in getting their nutrients. So let us see one example. Now certain fungus live in the roots of the trees. Now we know fungus is a disease for the plants or the trees. But there are also certain fungus which are very helpful for the trees. And generally they are found at the roots of the trees. Now what do these fungus do? Is that the trees provide nutrients to the fungus. Obviously, the trees can prepare their own food, so they can also supply some nutrients to this fungus. And what does this fungus do is that they help the trees to take up water and nutrients from the soil. We know the roots take up the water and minerals or the nutrients from the soil. But in addition to that, these fungus are beneficial or are helpful in taking up the water and the nutrients from the soil. We know the roots penetrate the soil, but it may not penetrate to a deeper level. So this fungus, in that case, the fungus can help them to get the excess amount of water that the plants of the trees require. Not only water, even the nutrients. So in this way, this fungus help the trees to get the essential nutrients and water. Now, symbiotic relationships are very helpful for organisms living in the same environment together for survival. Yes. Now, in this example itself, you can understand that both the fungus and the tree are dependent on each other. Neither of them can survive without the help of the other. So, this type of symbiotic relationship helps the organism to survive without any trouble in that same environment together and helping each other to get their essential minerals or nutrients. Now this is one example. You can see some fungus on the tree. These are not in the roots but near the root level. So this fungus, most of the time we think that this fungus is a disease for the plants, but sometimes it may not be. It may be a symbiotic relationship. Now moving on. Next is the replenishment of the nutrients in the soil. We know there are different kinds of nutrients present in the soil, but also we know that the plants take up these nutrients, and as a result, what would happen? The nutrients amount may get decline. So how to replenish this? How to bring back this amount of nutrients back to the soil? Let us see. Plants absorb mineral nutrients from the soil. We all know this. So the amount of nutrients in the soil keeps on declining. Obviously, if we keep on taking something and we don't replenish it, at some point of time, it will get reduced. Thus, the replenishment of those nutrients is necessary from time to time. So obviously, we need to replenish. Without replenishing the nutrients, what would happen? The soil may turn barren. Also, no crops or no plants would grow there due to lack of nutrients. So what to do? Fertilizers and manures are added for replenishment of nutrients such as nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, etc. What do we generally do? We see the farmers using fertilizers and manures like cow dungs. So what these do is that they help in the replenishment of the nutrients. Nutrients such as nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, etc. There are also other nutrients essential, but these are some of the important which I have given. So this is very clear that using the fertilizers and manure, they replenish. Now, among these nutrients, the crops mostly require nitrogen. Yes, nitrogen among this is the very essential nutrient because they help in making or they help in synthesizing the proteins for the plants. So nitrogen is already we have discussed in the earlier classes that how nitrogen is very essential because proteins is needed by the plant. Protein is one of the ingredient. So proteins are nitrogenous substances which contain nitrogen. So obviously you got the idea that why nitrogen is very important. Now moving on. Nitrogen is very abundant in the atmosphere, but the plants cannot take those gaseous nitrogen directly from the atmosphere, just like carbon dioxide. So how do they take this nitrogen? This nitrogen is converted into a usable form, the gaseous nitrogen, with the help of a certain nitrogen fixing bacteria called rhizobium. We have already discussed in the earlier class what is rhizobium, and they are present at the roots of the leguminous plants. Leguminous plants like pulses. So that's why we say pulses have a lot of protein. Or beans, such type of plants are leguminous plants. So we say these plants are rich in protein. Why? Because they have this bacteria at the roots called the rhizobium, which help in getting this nitrogen. And nitrogen means it helps in the synthesis of proteins for the plants. Now the soluble forms are absorbed by the plants along with water. Already we have discussed in the earlier class how these soluble forms are absorbed by the plants. So if you miss that part, you can revisit that part from the earlier class. Now, the rhizobium cannot prepare its own food. So the rhizobium, from where would they get the food? Obviously from the plant. So what is arising here is a symbiotic relationship between rhizobium and the plant, just like the fungus at the roots of the trees. It is same like that. So the leguminous plants provide food and shelter to the bacteria. So you can see the rhizobium helps in getting or in fixing or getting the gaseous nitrogen, which is very important nutrient for the plant. In the meantime, the leguminous plants also helps to provide food and shelter to rhizobium because rhizobium cannot prepare its own food. So we can say they have a symbiotic relationship. I hope this much is clear to you all. So this brings us to the end of the chapter. So please revisit the earlier classes if you have any doubt, as well as revisit the whole chapter as a whole and see and go through your textbook. I've given only one example of symbiotic relationship. There are also many other organisms which follow this symbiotic relationship. So you'll get that in their textbooks. So that's it for today. Thank you and have a nice day.